Walking into that baby shower, I didn't expect a warm welcome. I'd grown accustomed to being treated like a shadow in my own marriage, an afterthought to my wife's social ambitions. But this was a new low. As soon as I stepped into the grand restaurant hall, the opulence nearly blinded me. Crystal chandeliers casting golden light, pastel floral arrangements lining every surface, and a crowd dressed to impress in designer clothes. I paused for a moment, taking it all in. This wasn't a celebration. It was a statement, one that had little to do with our unborn child and everything to do with my wife's relentless need to climb the social ladder. The hostess, perched behind her podium, barely acknowledged me as I approached. "Do you have a reservation?" she asked, her tone a shade too polite, as if she didn't believe I belonged here. I handed her the invitation, embossed with gold lettering, naturally, and she scanned it without looking up. Her eyebrows twitched ever so slightly, a flicker of judgment she probably thought I wouldn't notice. "Ah, the Wilson baby shower," she said, gesturing vaguely toward the packed room. "It's already started. Enjoy. Enjoy." That word didn't sit right with me, but I walked in anyway. The room was buzzing with chatter and laughter, champagne glasses clinking as impeccably dressed guests toasted to what, exactly? To Melanie's curated perfection? To the facade of a happy marriage? As I made my way through the crowd, I noticed the seating arrangements, elegantly calligraphed name cards marking each place at the round tables. I scanned the names. Melanie's friends, her colleagues, even her yoga instructor had seats. My name? Nowhere. I stood there, feeling the weight of every pair of eyes that flicked my way before darting back to their conversations. The whispers weren't subtle. "Is that her husband? I thought he was just a small-time chef or something. Does he even have a real job? I heard he manages a pub." A pub. The lie my wife had let fester for years, reducing my work to something small and unimportant, because the truth didn't fit her narrative. Finally, Melanie noticed me. She was radiant in her custom-made maternity dress, her smile wide as she basked in the attention of her guests. "Oh, you made it," she said, her voice dripping with false warmth. "I didn't think you'd come." Before I could respond, she added, "It's just, we had more guests than expected, and, well," she gestured vaguely at the tables, "there's no seat for you." The words hit me harder than I'd expected, but I kept my expression neutral. "No seat?" I asked, my voice calm. I already knew the answer. Her smile didn't waver. "Why don't you try that pub across the street?" she suggested, her tone light and dismissive, as if she were doing me a favor. "It suits you perfectly." The laughter came next, rippling through the circle of her friends who had gathered around us. "Yes, the pub," one of them said, barely able to contain her giggles. "It's more your style, isn't it?" I stood there, absorbing their mockery, their sheer lack of respect. My gaze swept over the room, taking in the smirks, the raised eyebrows, the barely concealed glee. It would have been easy to lash out, to let anger take over, but I didn't. Instead, I smiled, a slow, deliberate smile that seemed to confuse Melanie and her entourage. "I'll do that," I said, my tone even. "Enjoy your party." And with that, I turned and walked away. My footsteps were steady, my shoulders square. I didn't look back, but I could feel their eyes on me as I crossed the room and exited through the grand doors. The humiliation they had intended to inflict didn't stick. It slid off me like water off a well-oiled pan. Outside, the crisp evening air greeted me as I crossed the street toward the pub they'd mocked so readily. I could imagine their smug satisfaction, the way they'd laugh about this moment later. What they didn't know, what none of them could have guessed, was that their assumptions about me, about my work, my worth, were about to crumble. They thought they'd reduced me to nothing. But what they didn't realize was that I wasn't walking into a pub to drown my embarrassment. I was walking into my kingdom, a place I had built with my own hands, a testament to my skill and vision. And by the time they figured that out, their laughter would have turned to silence. The air outside the restaurant was cool, crisp enough to feel like a slap across my face, though not nearly as harsh as the sting of their words. The faint hum of traffic and the distant chatter of passers-by filled the evening, but all I could hear in my mind were Melanie's mocking words. It suits you perfectly. A dirty pub. That's what they thought of me and my life's work. It was laughable, really. If only they knew. I took my time crossing the street, each step measured and deliberate. The pub, or rather, what they thought was a pub, stood just a few paces away, its facade humble but impeccably maintained. A weathered sign hung above the entrance, the letters understated but elegant, the hidden gem. It was by design, of course. The name, the aesthetic, it all served a purpose. People who judged a book by its cover would dismiss it as another ordinary hole in the wall. And that was fine with me. It kept out the people who valued flash over substance, who wouldn't appreciate the artistry behind what we created here. Only those who truly sought something special ever walked through those doors. I reached the entrance, pausing for a moment. Behind me, I could feel the weight of their stares from across the street. Melanie and her friends, no doubt still snickering over my supposed humiliation. Their laughter wouldn't last long. I pushed open the door, and as soon as I stepped inside, everything changed. "Chef!" The maitre d' greeted me, his voice tinged with a mix of relief and respect. The room fell into a quiet hush as the staff turned to look at me. There was no mistaking it. I was home. The interior was the opposite of what Melanie's crowd would have expected. Subtle, refined, and intentionally intimate. It was a space designed for those who valued quality over pomp. The tables were set with precision, crystal glasses sparkling under the soft glow of chandeliers. The aroma of fresh herbs, aged wine, and seared perfection wafted through the air. It was intoxicating, even for me, and I lived in it every day. I nodded at the maitre d' as I shrugged off my jacket, handing it to a waiting staff member. "How are we looking tonight?" I asked casually, already scanning the dining room. "Fully booked, chef," he replied, his tone almost apologetic. "We've got a few VIPs at table 5 and an inspector at table 3. Everything's running smoothly." "Good," I said, my voice calm but authoritative. "Let's keep it that way." As I made my way toward the kitchen, the staff parted like the Red Sea, their eyes filled with a mixture of admiration and gratitude. These were my people, my team, the ones who had stood by me through years of relentless hard work. They didn't see me as an afterthought or a joke. To them, I was the driving force behind everything we'd achieved. The kitchen was a symphony of controlled chaos. Chefs moved with practiced efficiency, their movements synchronized like dancers in a ballet. The hiss of pans, the rhythmic chop of knives, the occasional shout of a sous chef, it was music to my ears. And at the center of it all was me. "Chef on the line," someone called as I stepped up to the pass. I didn't need to announce myself. My presence was enough to shift the energy in the room. I spent a few minutes checking the night specials, tasting sauces, and offering quiet corrections where needed. Every detail mattered here, from the angle of a garnish to the exact sear on a piece of fish. Excellence wasn't just a goal. It was the standard. Satisfied that everything was running smoothly, I leaned against the counter for a moment, letting the warmth of the kitchen surround me. It was moments like this that reminded me why I'd chosen this path. The sweat, the late nights, the endless hours. It had all been worth it. From the corner of my eye, I noticed movement by the window. Across the street, silhouetted against the restaurant's warm glow, I saw Melanie and her friends. Their expressions had shifted from smug amusement to something closer to disbelief. I could almost hear their thoughts. What is he doing in there? For a brief moment, I considered walking back across the street, standing in front of them, and spelling it all out. I could have told them about the Michelin stars, the months-long reservation waitlist, the glowing reviews in every major food magazine. I could have explained that the hidden gem wasn't just a restaurant, it was a legacy. But where was the fun in that? Let them wonder. Let them put the pieces together on their own. I'd spent years letting them believe what they wanted to believe about me. Tonight, they could taste the consequences of their assumptions. I straightened up, smoothing the front of my chef's jacket, the embroidered "chef" on the pocket catching the light. With a quiet confidence, I turned my back on the window and walked deeper into my kitchen. My work was waiting, and I had a full house to impress. If Melanie and her friends wanted to learn the truth, they'd have to do it the hard way. Back in the kitchen, The night hummed along like a well-rehearsed symphony. Every plate leaving the pass was a work of art, every dish a testament to the meticulous care we poured into this place. I monitored each order with the precision of a conductor, tasting, correcting, and encouraging. The glow of pride in my staff's faces reminded me of what we had built together. I didn't need to look out the window again to know Melanie and her entourage were still there. Their curiosity was palpable, even from this distance. They probably thought I was wallowing in some dingy corner of the pub they had mocked, drowning my sorrows. They had no idea the doors they were staring at led to one of the most exclusive dining experiences in the city. And they certainly didn't know who was running the show. When the maitre d' approached me with an update, his voice carried a subtle note of amusement. "Chef, it seems we have some unexpected guests loitering outside. They've been peering in for a while now." I smirked, not surprised in the slightest. "Let them look," I said. "They'll figure it out soon enough." And figure it out they did. The first domino fell when a sleek black car pulled up to the curb. The driver stepped out and opened the back door, revealing one of Boston's most prominent art collectors. She entered the restaurant with an air of practiced elegance, greeted warmly by my staff as a regular. Moments later, another high-profile guest arrived, a Harvard professor who had been a loyal patron for years. Each new arrival chipped away at Melanie's carefully constructed assumptions. The whispers started soon after. I could imagine the conversations happening across the street as Melanie and her friends began connecting the dots. Why are all these important people going into a pub? Why does the staff look so professional? And why does everyone seem to know him? Inside, the atmosphere remained calm and poised. My staff operated like clockwork, delivering the kind of flawless service that earned us our reputation. Meanwhile, I moved between stations, lending a hand where needed, my mind half focused on the night's work and half amused by the unraveling happening just outside those doors. The pivotal moment came when I stepped into the dining room to greet a VIP guest. As I approached the table, the Harvard professor rose to shake my hand. "Chef," he said warmly, "another masterpiece tonight. You've outdone yourself again." I thanked him, exchanging a few pleasantries before moving to the next table. The art collector, a woman known for her discerning taste, complimented the seasonal menu and mentioned how she had been looking forward to this reservation for months. These interactions were routine for me, but tonight, they carried an extra layer of satisfaction. I could feel their eyes on me, Melanie's and her friends, as I moved through the dining room. From where they stood outside, they had a clear view of the way the guests greeted me, the way the staff deferred to me, the way I carried myself with quiet authority. It was undeniable now. I wasn't just another face in the crowd. I was the face behind the hidden gem. As I returned to the kitchen, the maitre d' stopped me, a faint smile playing on his lips. "Chef, I think they're starting to understand." "Good," I said simply, slipping back into the rhythm of the night. I didn't need to gloat or confront them directly. The truth was doing all the work for me. By the time dessert was served, Melanie and her friends were gone. I imagined their walk back to the baby shower, the heavy silence hanging between them as they tried to process what they had just seen. They had come to mock me, to revel in what they assumed was my humiliation, and instead, they had stumbled upon a reality far beyond their comprehension. That night, as the last table cleared and the kitchen wound down, I allowed myself a moment of quiet reflection. My life didn't fit neatly into the box Melanie had tried to shove me into, and it never would. I had built something extraordinary, something that spoke for itself. I didn't need their approval or validation. Their pale faces, their stunned silence, that was enough. And the best part? This was just the beginning. They hadn't even scratched the surface of what the hidden gem truly represented. But soon they would. And I had a feeling they wouldn't be laughing anymore. As I worked my way through the evening rush at the hidden gem, I could feel the weight of their stares from across the street. Melanie and her entourage weren't subtle. Their disbelief was written in their body language. Their confident smirks had melted into confusion, their laughter replaced by furrowed brows and whispered conversations. It was only a matter of time before their curiosity overpowered their pride. The first crack in their facade came when a distinguished older man arrived, a local philanthropist whose name carried significant weight in Boston's elite circles. He stepped out of his car, greeted warmly by my staff, and entered the restaurant with the ease of someone who knew he belonged. It was the kind of man Melanie and her friends would bend over backward to impress. And yet, here he was, walking into what they had called a dirty pub. I imagined their whispered questions. What's he doing here? Does he know something we don't? Then came the second guest, a prominent tech CEO whose face had graced the cover of countless magazines. He was followed by his wife, who was equally famous for her philanthropy work. They walked in as if this restaurant was their second home, and for them, it practically was. The CEO shook my hand at the door, expressing his excitement for the seasonal menu we'd created just last week. From across the street, Melanie and her friends must have been struggling to piece it all together. It wasn't just the high-profile arrivals. It was the way the staff moved with military precision, the elegance of the restaurant's understated interior, and the sheer quality radiating from the place. This wasn't a pub. It was something far more significant, and they were beginning to realize it. The tipping point came when a pair of food critics arrived. I recognized them instantly. Both had written glowing reviews for us in the past. They were escorted to their table with the kind of care and attention we reserved for our most important guests. One of them glanced toward the kitchen, catching my eye, and raised his glass in acknowledgement. I nodded back, feeling the thrill of knowing they were about to experience something unforgettable. By now, Melanie and her group were no longer watching discreetly. They were openly staring, their expressions a mix of confusion and disbelief. It was almost comical. These were women who prided themselves on being in the know, on having access to the best of everything. And yet, they had completely missed this gem right under their noses. The final blow came when one of Melanie's more socially ambitious friends decided to investigate. I saw her cross the street, her designer heels clicking against the pavement, her expression a careful mix of curiosity and entitlement. She approached the maitre d' with a practiced smile, the kind that usually opened doors in their world. "Excuse me," she said, her tone dripping with feigned politeness. "This restaurant, is it new? I haven't heard of it before." The maitre d', to his credit, didn't bat an eye. "The hidden gem has been serving guests for over a decade, ma'am," he replied, his professionalism impeccable. "It's an exclusive dining experience. Reservations are by recommendation only." Her smile faltered. "Recommendation?" she repeated, clearly unprepared for this level of exclusivity. "Yes, ma'am," he confirmed. "We prioritize guests who are referred by existing patrons. Our waitlist is currently 3 months long." She stood there, stunned into silence. Finally, she managed a strained, "I see," before retreating back across the street to rejoin Melanie and the others. I could almost feel their collective panic as the reality of their mistake sank in. From my vantage point in the kitchen, I allowed myself a small, private smile. This was better than any confrontation could have been. They had come to mock me, to belittle my work, and now they were scrambling to make sense of a world they had no access to. As the evening progressed, their presence outside became less bold. The chatter died down, their laughter faded, and their smugness dissolved into an awkward tension. I didn't have to do anything to prove my worth. My restaurant, my team, and the caliber of our guests had done it for me. By the time the last of Melanie's friends left, their faces pale and their confidence shattered, I felt no satisfaction in their discomfort. What I felt was pride, not in outshining them, but in knowing that my work, my passion, had made its mark without needing their approval. They had judged me, dismissed me, and now, they were the ones left to grapple with their own superficiality. And the best part? They still didn't know the full truth. They didn't know that the chef they had mocked, the husband they had belittled, was the very heart of the hidden gem. That revelation would come soon enough, and I had no doubt it would hit them like a freight train. For now, I was content to let them stew in their confusion. They'd set the stage for this moment, and they'd gotten exactly the show they deserved. Later that evening, after the rush had died down and the final guests had been served, I leaned back against the counter in the kitchen, reflecting on the day. It had been a good service, flawless, in fact. The kind of evening that reminded me why I had chosen this life. But there was something else lingering in the back of my mind. The realization that tonight wasn't over for Melanie and her friends? Not yet. They had left my view hours ago, but I knew their minds were racing. I could picture them, huddled together at the baby shower, the celebratory mood replaced by hushed speculation. Whispers would swirl around the room, fueled by the snippets of what they had seen across the street. The hidden gem wasn't a dirty pub. It was something more, something they didn't understand. And that lack of understanding would drive them to dig deeper. I imagined Melanie and her closest friend, Amanda, one of the loudest voices in the earlier mockery, grabbing their phones, searching for answers. Maybe they'd try to Google the restaurant, only to find limited information on our website. I had intentionally kept it sparse, a single page with our name, a brief description of our philosophy, and a note about the reservation process. No photos, no excessive details, just enough to intrigue the right kind of guest. But the reviews? Those would be unavoidable. Our glowing reputation was well documented in gourmet magazines, food blogs, and critic sites. Articles praising the hidden gem as one of Boston's most exclusive dining experiences would start to appear on their screens. Headlines like, "The Hidden Gem, Boston's Best-Kept Culinary Secret," or "Chef Liz's 2-Star Michelin Wonder" would jump out at them, and they'd start piecing together the connection. At some point, they'd stumble upon the mention of the head chef, Chef Liz, as I was known in the culinary world. The realization would be slow but inevitable. Elizabeth's husband, the man they had ridiculed and dismissed, wasn't just a chef. He was the chef, the creator of the restaurant they suddenly wished they could enter. I could imagine Melanie's reaction as the puzzle clicked into place. Her fingers trembling as she scrolled through article after article, her face pale as the truth sank in. She'd remember every comment she had made that evening, every dismissive glance and snide remark. And then she'd see the timeline, the dates lining up perfectly with the years she had spent underestimating me. 10 years of effort, success, and acclaim that she had ignored because it didn't fit her shallow narrative. And what about her friends? They'd be equally horrified, especially the ones who prided themselves on knowing all the best spots in town. They'd feel betrayed by their own ignorance, embarrassed that they had mocked what turned out to be one of the city's most sought-after dining experiences. Their mockery wasn't just misplaced. It was deeply ironic. But the best part of it all? The realization that they couldn't fix this. They couldn't simply book a table to save face. No amount of money or connections would get them past my carefully designed reservation system. They would need a referral from an existing patron, someone who had already been vetted and approved. And even then, they'd have to wait months for a table. As these thoughts played out in my mind, I felt no anger. If anything, I felt a quiet sense of validation. I didn't need their respect or their approval to succeed. I had built this restaurant from the ground up, brick by brick, dish by dish, with no shortcuts and no compromises. My work spoke for itself, and tonight, it had spoken loudly enough for Melanie and her circle to hear. I stepped out of the kitchen into the now empty dining room. The chandeliers cast a warm, golden glow over the tables, each one meticulously set for the next day's service. I walked to the window and glanced across the street, where the baby shower had long since ended. The lights were off, the venue silent, but I knew their conversations were far from over. Tomorrow, or maybe the next day, I'd hear whispers about their reactions. Someone from their circle would undoubtedly try to reach out, attempting to smooth things over or secure a reservation. I wasn't worried. My staff knew the protocol, and I trusted them to handle it. My life, my work, and my success didn't depend on their acceptance. It never had. I locked the door to the restaurant and stepped out into the cool night air, a satisfied smile tugging at the corners of my lips. Tonight had been a lesson, not for me, but for them. They had spent years judging me by appearances, by their own shallow metrics of worth. And tonight, those judgments had been turned on their heads. As I walked home, I thought about the days to come. Melanie and her friends had only just begun to unravel the truth, but there was so much more they hadn't seen. My story, my journey, and my accomplishments were far more than what they could grasp in a single evening. And soon, they'd realize that the man they had dismissed so easily wasn't just someone who suited a pub. He was someone they could never hope to match. The morning after the baby shower, I knew the ripples of the previous evening had already started to spread. Melanie and her friends were not the type to let a mystery rest. By now, they would have scoured every available source, trying to piece together how the dirty pub they mocked turned out to be one of the most exclusive culinary spots in Boston. But I also knew they wouldn't find everything. The true weight of what they had witnessed would take more than a quick Google search to fully sink in. Later that day, as I went about my usual routine at the hidden gym, one of the servers approached me with a knowing look. "Chef," he began, "there's a woman at the door asking about reservations. She didn't have an appointment, but she says she knows you." I didn't need to ask who it was. "Send the maitre d' to handle it," I said calmly, not even looking up from the sauce I was adjusting. They know the policy. Sure enough, a few minutes later, the maitre d' returned with an update. "Chef, it's your wife's friend Amanda. She's trying to use her connection to Mrs. Wilson to secure a table. She's insistent." "Is she now?" I said, a slight smirk tugging at my lips. "What did you tell her?" I reminded her that reservations are by referral only, and existing patrons must write a recommendation letter. She didn't take it well. I nodded, satisfied. Let her figure it out. The first cracks in their arrogance were starting to show. Amanda's entitlement had led her straight to my doorstep, but entitlement alone wasn't enough to gain access here. She was learning, slowly but surely, that the hidden gem operated on a different set of rules that valued substance over superficiality. Later that evening, another server approached me. "Chef," she said cautiously, "Mrs. Wilson is here." I froze for a moment, not out of surprise but out of curiosity. What had brought Melanie here so quickly? Was it guilt, desperation, or something else entirely? I removed my apron, wiped my hands, and stepped out into the main dining room. There she was, standing near the entrance in a designer coat that looked out of place against the understated elegance of the hidden gem. Her face was pale, her posture stiff. She looked like someone who had just realized the weight of her mistakes and had no idea how to fix them. "Melanie," I said evenly, folding my arms as I approached her. "What are you doing here?" She hesitated, glancing around the room as if searching for the right words. I wanted to talk to you," she finally said, "and maybe make a reservation." I raised an eyebrow. "You know the policy." "Yes, I know," she said quickly, "but you're my husband. Surely there's something you can do." Her voice wavered, and for the first time in years, I saw a glimpse of vulnerability in her. But I wasn't ready to let her off the hook. Not yet. "The policy applies to everyone, Melanie," I said calmly, "including you." Her lips parted, but no words came out. She looked around again, taking in the quiet sophistication of the dining room, the effortless grace of the servers, the air of exclusivity that hung over everything. I could see the wheels turning in her mind as she compared this to the image she had of me, a small-time chef running a pub. The disconnect was too wide to ignore. Finally, she said, "I didn't know, okay? I didn't know this is what you've been building." "That's because you never asked," I replied, my tone measured but firm. "You and your friends made assumptions, and you were happy to leave it at that. Why would I share this with people who don't care to understand?" Her face fell, and for a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. But I reminded myself that this wasn't just about last night. This was about years of dismissal, of her letting me become a punchline in her social circle. If she was here now, it wasn't because she suddenly valued what I did. It was because she felt embarrassed. "Please," she said softly, her voice barely audible, "I want to understand." I studied her for a long moment, searching for any trace of sincerity. Maybe there was some, buried under layers of pride and guilt. But it wasn't enough. Not yet. "If you want to understand," I said finally, "you'll have to earn it." Her brows knitted together in confusion. "What does that mean?" "It means," I said, leaning in slightly, "that you start at the bottom, just like everyone else here. If you want to understand what it takes to make something like this, you'll need to put in the work." She stared at me, her mouth opening and closing as she tried to process my words. "You want me to work here?" she asked incredulously. I nodded. "Exactly. No shortcuts, no special treatment. You want to see what this world is like? You'll have to experience it firsthand." She looked as if I had just asked her to climb Mount Everest. "I don't know if I can." "Then don't," I said simply. "But if you're serious, you'll figure it out." Without another word, I turned and walked back into the kitchen, leaving her standing there. I didn't know if she would take me up on the offer, but for the first time in our marriage, I felt like I had drawn a line she couldn't cross with empty words or half-hearted promises. If she truly wanted to understand, she would have to prove it. And if not, well, that was her decision to make. For once, I wasn't waiting for her approval. I had all the validation I needed right here. After my conversation with Melanie, I returned to the kitchen, slipping seamlessly back into the flow of the evening. Orders came in, plates went out, and the hum of the restaurant continued uninterrupted. For the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of balance. My life, my work, and even this moment with Melanie, it all made sense now. I wasn't bitter, nor was I angry. What I felt was clarity. Melanie had been stunned by my proposal, but I meant every word of it. I wasn't going to spoon-feed her the respect she thought she could demand simply because of who she was. If she wanted to understand the life I had built, the effort I had poured into this restaurant, and the quiet pride I took in every success, she would have to work for it. And that, I knew, was a concept foreign to her. By the time the evening service came to an end, I allowed myself a moment to reflect. The kitchen was spotless, the staff was winding down, and the faint scent of rosemary and seared meat lingered in the air. I leaned against the counter and stared out into the now empty dining room. Every detail, the perfectly set tables, the sparkling glassware, the polished chandeliers, was a reminder of how far I had come. And Melanie's reaction tonight had only reinforced that. I didn't need her validation. Not anymore. For years, I had allowed myself to shrink under the weight of her judgment, her dismissive remarks, and her unspoken disappointment. I had convinced myself that it didn't matter, that her opinion was just another part of the background noise in my life. But tonight, standing in my restaurant, I realized that wasn't entirely true. Her disdain had hurt me, but not in the way she thought. It hadn't undermined my confidence or my ability. What it had done was push me to prove her wrong, not to her, but to myself. I wasn't interested in revenge or even in showing her up. My decision to invite her to work at the hidden gym wasn't about punishment. It was about giving her an opportunity to see what she had overlooked for years. If she truly wanted to bridge the gap between us, this was the only way. Words wouldn't cut it. Apologies, no matter how sincere, couldn't erase the years of condescension. Action was the only currency that mattered now. I thought back to our early days together, back when I first fell in love with her. Melanie had always been ambitious, but there had been a time when her ambition was grounded in something real, something authentic. She used to dream big, just like me. Somewhere along the way, though, she had traded those dreams for the shiny veneer of social status. She became more concerned with appearances than substance, more interested in what others thought of her than what she thought of herself. It wasn't just me she had dismissed. It was her own sense of authenticity. And yet, despite everything, I didn't hate her. I didn't want to see her fail. Deep down, I hoped she would rise to the challenge I had set for her. I hoped she would take that first step into my world, even if it meant starting as a dishwasher or a server. Because I knew that if she did, she would see things differently. She would see the pride in hard work, the beauty in craftsmanship, and the quiet satisfaction of creating something meaningful. She would understand, for the first time, what it meant to value substance over style. The sound of footsteps pulled me out of my thoughts. It was one of my sous chefs, a young woman named Clara who had been with me since the early days. She approached me with a curious expression. "Chef," she said, "is everything okay? You seemed different tonight." I smiled faintly. "I'm fine, Clara. Just thinking." She nodded, studying me for a moment before turning to leave. But then she paused. "Whatever it is, chef," she said over her shoulder, "I think you're handling it the right way." Her words lingered long after she left the kitchen. Maybe I was handling it the right way. Or maybe I wasn't. Only time would tell. But one thing was certain. I wasn't going to compromise myself or my principles for the sake of making things easier. Melanie had to earn her place in this story, just as I had earned mine. As I locked up the restaurant and stepped out into the cool night air, I felt a strange sense of peace. The path ahead wasn't going to be easy, for Melanie, for me, or for our relationship, but it was the right path. And for the first time in years, I felt like I was standing on solid ground. This wasn't about proving anything to anyone. It was about living my truth, unapologetically and fully. If Melanie could walk that path with me, so be it. If not, I would keep walking alone. Either way, I was finally free. The following week was quiet, at least on the surface. Melanie hadn't called, texted, or shown up at the hidden gym since our conversation. I wasn't surprised. The idea of starting from the bottom, of working her way into something rather than simply being handed it, must have been unfathomable to her. She'd built her life around appearances, around shortcuts and smooth paths paved by others. The thought of standing at a sink scrubbing dishes or taking orders from me, her husband, must have been unbearable. And yet, I noticed small signs that she hadn't dismissed my offer completely. A few of our mutual acquaintances, friends from her social circle who had always treated me as invisible, started asking subtle questions about the restaurant. I heard it's impossible to get a reservation, one of them said at a neighborhood gathering I happened to attend. Another commented on the feature in Taste of Boston that had recently named the hidden gem the city's best-kept secret. It was clear Melanie had been talking, even if she hadn't spoken to me directly. By the end of the week, the phone call came. I was in the middle of prepping for the evening service when my phone buzzed in my pocket. Seeing Melanie's name on the screen, I hesitated for a moment before answering. Hello? Her voice was quiet, almost hesitant. Is your offer still open? I set down the knife I was holding and leaned against the counter. Which offer? I asked, deliberately making her spell it out. To work at the restaurant, she said, her words stumbling slightly. To start at the bottom. I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I let the silence hang between us, giving her time to sit with the weight of what she was asking. Finally, I said, yes. The offer is still open. She exhaled audibly, as if releasing a breath she'd been holding for days. What do I need to do? I smiled faintly, even though she couldn't see it. Show up tomorrow at 9 a.m. sharp. Wear something comfortable and don't expect special treatment. You'll be starting as a dishwasher. There was a long pause on her end, and for a moment, I wondered if she'd hang up. But instead, she said, I'll be there. True to her word, Melanie arrived the next morning. She looked out of place standing at the restaurant's back entrance, her designer sneakers and carefully styled ponytail contrasting sharply with the utilitarian atmosphere of the kitchen. I greeted her with a curt nod, handing her an apron and pointing her toward the sink. You'll be working with Jose today, I said, gesturing toward our head dishwasher. He'll show you the ropes. Her eyes darted around the room, taking in the controlled chaos of the prep team slicing vegetables, the line cooks preparing sauces, and the sous chefs reviewing the evening's menu. It was a world she had never been part of, and I could see the discomfort written all over her face. But to her credit, she didn't complain. She tied on the apron, rolled up her sleeves, and got to work. The first day was grueling for her. I made sure of it. Dishwashing wasn't glamorous, and it wasn't easy. The steam from the industrial sink left her hair damp, and by midday, her pristine sneakers were splattered with grease and water. Jose didn't go easy on her, either, barking instructions with the same no-nonsense tone he used for every new recruit. By the end of the shift, Melanie looked exhausted, her hands red and wrinkled from hours in the soapy water. How'd it go? I asked her as she untied her apron. She glared at me, but there was no venom in it, just a weary sort of resignation. It's harder than it looks, she admitted. Most things are, I replied. See you tomorrow. And she came back the next day, and the day after that. Each morning, she arrived on time, dressed down and ready to work. She didn't complain, even when the tasks were monotonous or physically demanding. Slowly but surely, she began to integrate into the rhythm of the kitchen. The staff, who had been wary of her at first, started warming up to her. Jose even joked with her one afternoon, calling her Mel instead of Mrs. Wilson. It was a small gesture, but it meant something. As the days turned into weeks, I saw subtle changes in Melanie. Her posture became less rigid, her tone less defensive. She asked questions, listened to answers, and began to appreciate the effort that went into every detail of the restaurant. One evening, during a quiet moment before service, she stood next to me at the pass, watching as I plated a dish. "How do you do it?" she asked, her voice filled with genuine curiosity. "Do what?" I asked without looking up. "Make it all look so effortless," she said, gesturing to the pristine plate in front of us. I smirked. "It's not effortless. It's years of practice. But if you love what you're doing, the effort becomes part of the joy." She didn't say anything, but the look on her face told me she was starting to understand. It wasn't an easy road, for her or for us. There were still moments of tension, still unspoken wounds that hadn't fully healed. But Melanie was trying, and that mattered more to me than anything. She was beginning to see the value in the things she had once dismissed, and in doing so, she was beginning to see me. For the first time in years, I felt hope, not just for our relationship, but for the possibility that Melanie might finally understand what it meant to truly value something. And for now, that was enough. Months passed, and Melanie's transformation became undeniable. The woman who had once dismissed my work as trivial now stood shoulder to shoulder with my staff, scrubbing pans, taking orders, and even assisting in prep work. Her manicured hands had grown rough from hours of hard labor, and her once perfect posture now carried the humility of someone who understood the grind. It wasn't just her actions that had changed. Her entire demeanor was different. There was a quietness about her now, a willingness to listen and learn that hadn't existed before. My staff noticed the change, too. Jose, our head dishwasher, spoke highly of her, a stark contrast to the skepticism he had initially voiced. Clara, one of our sous chefs, even started mentoring Melanie, teaching her basic knife skills and kitchen etiquette. It wasn't easy for her. Melanie struggled with the pace and precision the job demanded. But she never gave up. Every mistake was met with determination, every critique taken as an opportunity to improve. Slowly but surely, she earned the respect of the team. I watched all of this unfold with a mix of pride and cautious optimism. Melanie was proving herself, not just to me but to everyone around her. And while the scars of our past hadn't completely healed, her effort was undeniable. For the first time in years, I felt like we were on the same path, working toward something together. One evening, after the restaurant had closed, I called Melanie and my mother-in-law, Carol, to the dining room. They both looked surprised. Carol had also started helping out at the restaurant on weekends, assisting with table service and greeting guests. It had been her way of reconnecting, of trying to mend the years of distance between us. She had grown quieter, too, her once critical tone softened by the humility of seeing what I had built. The dining room was dimly lit, the chandeliers casting a warm, golden glow over the tables. At the center of the room, I had set up a single table, adorned with a simple arrangement of wildflowers. It wasn't flashy, but it carried the same intentionality that defined every detail of the hidden gem. "What's this?" Melanie asked, her voice tinged with curiosity. "Sit," I said, gesturing to the table. They obeyed, their expressions wary but intrigued. I disappeared into the kitchen for a few moments before returning with the first dish, a delicate amuse-bouche of New England clams, infused with subtle French flavors. I placed it before them and said, "This is where it all began." Melanie and Carol exchanged glances before taking a bite. Their eyes widened as the flavors hit them, a blend of nostalgia and innovation dancing on their palates. "This is incredible," Carol said softly. I smiled. "It's one of the first dishes I perfected when I was training in France. It reminds me of the long hours, the sleepless nights, and the determination that brought me here." Course after course followed, each one telling a story, a moment from my journey that had shaped not only my career but also the person I had become. Melanie and Carol listened intently as I explained the significance of each dish, their expressions a mix of awe and regret. They were beginning to see what they had missed all these years, the depth of passion and purpose behind my work. By the time the final course arrived, a dessert inspired by my grandmother's recipes, the mood in the room had shifted. Melanie's eyes glistened with unshed tears as she looked at me. "I never knew," she said, her voice trembling. I never understood how much this meant to you. To us. I nodded, my own emotions threatening to surface. That's why I didn't tell you, I admitted. Because you wouldn't have seen it back then. But now, you do. Carol reached across the table and placed a hand on mine. We were wrong, she said, her voice heavy with regret. We judged you unfairly, and we dismissed something truly remarkable. I see that now. The moment was raw, vulnerable, and deeply cathartic. It wasn't just an apology. It was an acknowledgement of everything I had endured, a recognition of the sacrifices I had made, and the quiet strength I had carried through it all. The next morning, I prepared a special brunch for Melanie, Carol, and their family. Just them, in the same dining room where countless VIPs had dined before. The meal wasn't about impressing anyone or proving anything. It was about reconnecting. Each dish was simple but filled with meaning, a reflection of the journey we had taken to reach this point. As Melanie cradled our baby girl in her arms, I saw a softness in her that hadn't been there before. She looked at me with a kind of respect and admiration that I had thought was lost forever. Carol, too, seemed at peace, her previous pretensions replaced by a genuine appreciation for the life we had built. That day marked the start of a new chapter, not just for me, but for all of us. It wasn't about revenge or validation anymore. It was about rebuilding, about finding value in the things that truly mattered. And as I looked around the table at my family, I realized that for the first time in years, we were finally beginning to understand each other. Outside, the streets of Boston were bathed in morning light, and the red brick walls of the hidden gym stood as a quiet testament to everything we had overcome. This wasn't just a restaurant. It was a symbol of resilience, of love, and of the power of seeing beyond appearances to find true value. And as we shared that meal together, I knew we were ready to write the next chapter, together.